Hey everybody, how's it going today? Well, if you hadn't noticed, I had a little bit of a week hiatus. Unannounced, not really said anything about it. To be honest, wasn't feeling it last week, even though there's a lot of stuff to cover, and there's still a lot of stuff to cover, so I'll probably throw up an extra video or two in the next week or so, just so that we can get caught up with what we got to get caught up with because the world goes on, even if even if you're feeling a little bit bummed. But more importantly, even like I kind of got intimidated a little bit covering this next topic because this next topic was something I knew I was going to have to cover um, at some point, and the day it comes, you're kind of still shocked about it. Um, because it's like you know that there's certain furries that are older than you that you look up to and have inspired you and kind of are very much responsible for the world in which you're in, or the the positions in which you are in and what you do in the fandom, and you know that they're older than you and so you know that they're going to pass on. So usually when I do an obituary, I usually don't have my fursuit head on. Sort of as a, but that's sort of more of a shock sort of thing. Like if it was a shocking loss or something like that, I don't. In this essence, I don't feel that this one was a shocking loss. It was more, the person lived a good long life, and we should celebrate that life. And so I just am going to wear the fursuit head on in this case because there's a lot to cover here, and it's more of a celebration about what this individual did for this fandom, more than it is a mourning of a loss. Um, but it is a loss. It certainly is one, and it's really hard to kind of find the words, and that's why I sort of got intimidated and got cold feet. And those are really big feet to get cold feet on when talking about this particular individual. So I guess the best way to lead off into this is um, you when you hear a song when you're very young, and it was about the day the music died, right? So when I was young, I quite get it. I was kind of like, I went to my parents. It's like they're singing a song about the day the music died. I mean, if the music died, how could they be singing a song? I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? And my parents kind of laugh about that, and they're like, well, you don't understand. And it's like, well, what does it mean? And they're like, well, it's hard to explain. You'll understand when you get older. So to me, I understood that on November 12th, mostly because there were two deaths on that day, and they're not like directly related, but they do sort of have a tangential relationship within themselves. So for those of you who haven't heard, or those of you who are into the comics or the superhero movie genre, Stan Lee passed on November 12th. But that's not who this video is about, ironically. But there is sort of a relation there in that Stan Lee also lived a very long and fruitful life, and he died at the age of 95. And so when he passed on, it's like a lot of people in the fandoms of comics, books, industries, and things like that, felt a deep loss within their community. It was a loss they knew was coming, but it was still very hard to deal with in and of itself. Unlike the day the music died, which was more of a shocking tragedy of a plane crash. But at the same time, an individual who is 20 years younger than Stan Lee also passed on. And whereas Stan Lee kind of represents the monolithic content creator who basically creates fandoms in his wake, Fred Patten, who also passed on November 12th, sort of represents the hyper fan, like the individual who he doesn't create the content as much as he worked his tail off, which he doesn't have a tail. His fursona was a human, which is also an important point we'll get to. That he worked his butt off to make sure that more people could enjoy more content. The content that he felt was awesome and felt that needed to be shared with everybody, he worked both as a actual profession and in his spare time to ensure that people that those bits of content could reach an audience, in a world where sometimes the larger corporate powers that be won't try to do that themselves. And Fred Patten did that in his career. He's known in the anime fandom for being part of the earliest translations of, or I should say, westernizations of anime content during the 80s and 90s, I believe it was. So he worked for a studio that helped modernize and westernize those particular shows to come over here. Lupin the Third was one of the most well-known, the ones that I know as somebody who's not a big old anime fan. I know who Lupin the Third is. I know obviously I know what DBZ is. You know the big ones, and Death Note was a really good one. You don't really know about all the smaller ones, like the nitty gritty. I was never really a nitty gritty anime fan, but without the earliest works, the earliest boot on the grounds work to westernize anime, so that people over here could enjoy it without having to go through the whole bootlegging process. Certainly, I wouldn't none of us would know what was going on, or none of us would know those larger, more monolithic animes, because of the work that individuals like Fred Patten did in order to westernize them. He was also very much involved in some of the very first furry conventions that were created for our particular fandom. He was very much a part of the staff at Conference, which was one of our first major furry conventions in the West. But not only that, but even after the doors of Conference came to a close, even after those sailing points came across and were let free. He still worked very hard during his end years, up to the very end. He had a stroke in the mid 2000s, and that made him wheelchair bound for very much a long period of time. And so there was so the fact that he was, that he still kept working very hard on those things, despite, being wheelchair bound and all that stuff, that he was very much I guess if you're going to go back to the sort of comic book sense of things, he very much was, was Dr. Gosh, I'm not even big in the comics thing. What's the guy's name? Charles, right? Dr. Charles, the guy from X-Men, right? So, he very much, kept on his talent of writing and reading and making sure that, he promoted and saw and made note of all the different kind of furry content there was out there. And there is a lot out there, a lot more than you would think there is out there. But he would very much he would even look beyond. He was very much a monolithic person he was a Mr. Worldwide too. He would, take things from Japan, he would take things from France, he would take things from many cultures all around the world. And, even if, America covers a lot of American works, he made sure that a lot of the foreign works got covered as well. So he very much had a very much bilingual, trilingual, he was very much good with language and things like that. He covered so much content that for individuals such as myself, it's going to be a big shoe to fill. And for a kangaroo, that statement should not be taken lightly at all. When a kangaroo says, that's quite some big shoes to fill right there. He was very prolific, and in his years, and he said, Fred said, well, I've probably written over 1,000, review pieces for this sort of fandom content, and that's a short ball. Like he's and then that's he's got some humility to him if he's like, well, I've probably written about 1,000 pieces. No, man, you wrote 1,000 pieces. For Dogpatch Press, he wrote about 400, and like 420, 440 ish. For Flera, he wrote exactly 655 articles. And you can go through that big list in the description below. To sort of put that into perspective, I haven't reached the 100 mark yet. I haven't written 100 articles for it. It's getting there. I'm getting there. I'm almost to my 100th article written, but I'm still like in the 90s, I think. So like to get to 655, even though I've been writing there for about 8 years now, is a lot of content. It's a lot of work. And like when you look back and go like, man, I've only made 100, like not even made 100 articles so far, and I've put all this effort in, putting the effort to get 655. Not only but his things are even more time intensive. He's got to read the entire book of content, like read the entire thing, and then create a review for it. So like his things takes a lot of time to go through and do that. Things my things take some time, but not as much time. So it very much is big shoes to fill. And so for any of you who do, like to consume furry content and do like to read furry content, books, comics, things like that, there is going to be a big call for people who can, take the time to read, consume it, and give their thoughts and feelings about that content. And because there is a big hole right now. Dogpatch is going to need that particular person. Because Fred Patten provided about 35%, like about 35 to 40% of Dogpatch's content in the modern time before November 12th was provided by Fred Patten. And to be fair, a lot of Flera's content was also provided by Fred Patten before Fred Patten moved on to Dogpatch. So there is going to be a large void that needs to be filled for those who want to see more reviews about furry content within the fandom. So that's just something to keep in mind. Because I certainly, don't have as much time to read or consume furry content as I used to. So I usually talk about more meta news about furry fandom, news about furry fandom that's more in the real world rather than reviewing, content that is furry. So that's something that you got to, take into consideration. It's going to be tricky. It's going to be tough, but and it's kind of funny in a way where you think about Fred Patten, and it's like he's a hyper fan, and he might have been inspired because of great content creators like Stan Lee, and they just happened to die on the same day, and you think it's like how much did a person like Stan Lee inspire someone like Fred Patten, since they were about 20 years apart. You can very much see like that being a thing and being a possibility. And was he more of a DC guy? That just ruins my whole point. So yeah, down there is a picture of him in the Flash, the original Golden Year Flash from like the '60s, where the lightning bolts coming up out of his pants. Um, but yeah, it's so maybe he was more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy. I don't know, but I'm not. I don't know too much about comic book history, so I don't know if DC and Marvel are like sort of a Coke and Pepsi thing, sort of thing. I do believe that deep down fandoms, like the nerdy fandoms, are like, yeah, we have our passions about things, but we do respect people from the other side of the house. So it's like we're not like a Coke and Pepsi kind of a thing. It's like, oh yeah, DC inspires Marvel and Marvel inspires DC, and they have different properties and different characters, but they inspire one another and hopefully they do better for one another. And I think that is the principle of fandom, and I think that Fred Patten's ability to work across party lines, where a lot of the times these days where you see things like the gamer fandoms and the furry fandoms at war, and you see the anime fandoms and the furry fandoms at war, or in their little having their little brouhahas or whatever. That this individual was a nerd. He was he was obviously a comic book fan nerd. He liked anime. He liked furry stuff. He liked all those things, and he contributed to all those different fandoms, and had a role to play in all those different fandoms. For this generation that seems to be more ingrained and specialized, somebody who's like had their hats in all those different places is a very cool thing to see. It's a very it's a very kind of wonderful thing to see, and you hope that we never lose that as a society, as a nerdy society, that we realize that we're in this whole together of life, that we provide each other entertainment, that we provide each other access to those kind of awesome stories, and that we never forget the people who make those things possible, and those things are the fans, and those prolific fans that share their love of what they love with other people and use it to bring joy into their lives. Because in a world where technology sometimes divides us into things and tries to divide us into our own individual interests, and we get comfortable with that, sharing the things that we're passionate about can sometimes be tough, because we're worried that people will judge you and things like that. But think of all the wonderful things that would have been lost if the world was like that. Like that. You can't share these things that you're passionate with other people because you feel like you're wasting their time, and it's like that would be an unfortunate world. And I hope that we don't go that route, because I think that having your hat in multiple places can give you a more worldly perspective, and can help you create bridges in a world where we want to build walls. So, anyways, I think that covers basically everything. I guess an anecdotal thing would be more like my connection with Fred Patten, and like one of the more memorable moments that we had as an individual. Like some of the things I remember about him, he wasn't very technologically savvy, and I say that in the kindest of ways. Like, as a person who started editing for Flair about 2 years ago, Fred Patten's articles would come up every once in a while. And he very much did the old style of writing an article and then posting all the links at the very bottom of the article. And you know where he got it from, because that's how you used to do research papers. You would write things at the very top, and then you'd put all your references at the very bottom. Sort of Wikipedia-esque style, right? So that doesn't work for writing articles, so basically you would have to find a good sentence to put the links that he gave you in the description below into the top things. he didn't know how to HTML tag. Basically, he never really got a grasp on, you know, the bracket stuff with the B's and the I's and the hrefs. You know, he never really understood any of that because he didn't grow up in that era where, you know, understanding hypermark language was something that, you know, was basically a lifeline if you were communicating on the internet, which for my generation at the very beginnings of the internet was sort of a necessary skill. It isn't so much anymore, interestingly. Like now we have different kind of markup languages that people use, but, you know, but knowing that, like, particularly with the aging infrastructure of Flera, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you know, understanding hypermark language is actually very useful. Another issue with Fred was there was a bit of he definitely knew what he liked and didn't like as a fan, and so there were certain instances where he enjoyed, since he came from sort of more sci-fi roots in the furry fandom, he very much enjoyed the more biologically sound furry stories, where there is some basis of science behind it, and not really what he would call zipperback or funny animal kind of things. As an individual, I sort of, as a furry fan, I'm going to face facts. My stagnation into the furry sort of world building kind of leans more toward the funny animal aspects. I'm very much fine with like Pearls Before Swine, or, you know, a Animal Farm sort of allegory in a sense. But I do not shake my head at sort of just having animal characters for animal characters' sake. Such as like a story like, you know, one could argue House Pets would be kind of a funny animal. And the reason they call it funny animal is because there's like comics in the early like 40s and stuff like that, which were called funny animal strips, which were like animal cartoon characters being placed in a position where you can easily replace it with a human character. Underdog, I guess, would be considered one of them. You know, Snagglepuss, you know, all these like funny cartoon animal sort of things. The Snagglepuss, I guess, would be considered funny animal, and I'm sure. So you can have those, and like I'm very much fine with those particular things. There are certain people in the furry fandom who are not, and I think Fred Patten kind of fell in that sort of line of things. So he would always ask the question, is it furry or is it anthro? And that was sort of a theme of his that was sort of, you know, sort of tongue-in-cheek sort of poke at, you know, his thinkings about the furry fandom. I was featured in one of his anthologies, and his anthology was The Furry Future. And so I had the story called The Curators. And in that story, my challenge, and this was in the back of my head when I made it, I said, his description about what he wanted for his anthology very much was like, what is the biological reasoning, or what is the explain how furries end up being in the future, like with biology and stuff like that. And I tossed all that, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna write. My challenge to myself is to write a zipperback story or a funny animal story about that has a sci-fi setting, and to try and see if I can get it in there. And lo and behold, it got in there. And like, it was kind of funny because like there was one furry reviewer on a channel, I'll put that in the card above, who very much was like, oh man, this story stood out. And it's like, yeah, and it's kind of funny because he's like, he did sort of pick up on the whole thing. I think he overthought it because he was like putting in Einstein quotes and things like that. I was like, whoa. Like, you're giving me too much credit here, bud. Like, I was just trying to win a bet with myself. It's kind of funny. But like moments like that where you feel like, oh man, I had a chance to contribute to something, and have an opportunity to do so, was really, really wonderful. And he would every once in a while he would send like emails to me after like I was published on that, like for all these other anthologies he was doing. He's like, oh, this anthology is coming up if you want to write for it, and if this anthology is coming up if you want to write for it, and this one's coming up if you want to write for it. And I felt kind of bad because like I never really had a chance to, and I'm like, well, I don't feel it, and I'm like, because after like 2015 or so, I started moving away from the fiction writing aspect of the furry fandom and started more focusing on the nonfiction with this channel and with Falera. And I felt kind of bad for it, that that was going on. But in turn, I think that he understood in a way, because he also was one of the main people in the Ursa Majors, and around that time was when he introduced the nonfiction category to the Ursa Majors. Was around the 2016 range. Was when the nonfiction category was introduced to the Ursa Majors. Which, if that's the case, then thank him for that, bless him for that, because like it did kind of suck to like go, well, I'm gonna concentrate on nonfiction. Like it's not gonna be something that's rewarded as much as like providing fictional content and things like that. But I think Fred obviously knew that there was importance to it, that there was importance to providing nonfiction content to furry fandom, and I'll do my best to do well in his footsteps in that regard, to try my best to keep a solid record about things that happen without getting too biased about things, without getting too emotional about things, just like saying what was as opposed to what my feelings on things are. Obviously, I have passions about certain things, and people will understand that over time. But we'll do what we can. And the cycle goes on. Stan Lee passed on. He taught us a lot about how to make good graphic novels, comics, okay? And a lot of people will use those methods that he, helped develop in their own, and then maybe they'll develop their own sort of styles. And they'll inspire others who will create comics well past their time. And likewise, that we'll have fans that will contribute to a community in order to provide good content to one another. And so, to you, Fred, thank you very much, and hope you enjoy your well-earned time off. And thank you very much. Anyways, I'm gonna get the hop out of here, and I hope you guys have a good day. If you have any stories about Mr. Patten that you would like to share, feel free to kick a comment in the comment section. Feel free to kick a like or kick a subscription if you like content like this. Hopefully I don't have to do content like this often. But it will come up every once in a while as our fandom grows and we lose great contributors to our fandom. If you ever, and just so you're aware, if you ever lose a furry that you felt made great contributions to the fandom, Falera.com actually allows anybody to submit an article as they need. And so if somebody was lost and you want to like make a small obit to them or anything like that, feel free to sign up for a Falera account and put your own words and thoughts into it. Mark, one of the founders of Furry Fandom, of Mark Milano, I don't know if that's his last name or not. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's MM. Was a good friend of, I'll call him Mark, was a good friend of Fred, and he wrote his first Falera article on Fred's passing, and it was a very personal, touching story, and it is already the most well-received article that we have on our site. And it's good to see that that he took the opportunity to write that story for us. That will be in the description below, as well as a furry, as well as the as well as a article about his contributions to the anime and the furry fandom. So I'm going to get the hop out of here. Thank you once again for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you.